The morning rush at Los Angeles International Airport was a storm of sound and motion. Rolling suitcases rattled across the floor, coffee machines hissed, and boarding calls echoed from every direction. People hurried past each other, eyes fixed on phones and flight screens, their minds miles ahead of their bodies. But in the middle of that chaos stood a girl who couldn't hear any of it. Her name was Lena, a 19-year-old deaf girl, traveling alone for the very first time. She clutched a small, faded backpack to her chest, holding onto it as if it carried her whole world. Her brown hair was tied back in a loose ponytail, and her wide, anxious eyes scanned the glowing departure board. She couldn't hear the gate announcements, so she tried to read the words flashing across the screen, but they changed too quickly. Lena stepped closer, lips pressed together, her hands trembling as she tried to match her flight number. People brushed past her shoulders without even looking. To them, she was just another traveler in the crowd. Then, without her realizing, the gate for her flight changed. A new announcement boomed across the speakers: "Attention passengers, Flight 324 to Chicago will now depart from Gate 22. But Lena didn't hear it. She remained at Gate 14, staring at the wrong sign, waiting patiently for a flight that had already begun boarding somewhere else. Her phone battery blinked red, 2%. Panic started to rise in her chest. She looked around, wanting to ask someone, but every face was buried in a screen or a conversation. The world was loud, but for Lena, it was completely silent, and heartbreakingly lonely. Lena's heart pounded as she realized she was lost. Her fingers fidgeted nervously with the straps of her backpack. She wanted to ask for help, to tell someone, "Please, I need help," but the words were trapped behind a silence that no one around her could hear. She waved her hands frantically, hoping someone would notice. She mouthed the words "help me," over and over, but people simply brushed past. A businessman in a sharp suit glanced at her with impatience before hurrying away. A flight attendant rushed past, headset dangling, without a second glance. Each passing moment made Lena feel smaller, invisible in a world that moved too fast for her quiet voice. She glanced around desperately, spotting a few parents with children, a couple of travelers with heavy luggage, a man scrolling on his phone. None of them noticed the subtle tremor in her hands, the silent plea written across her face. Then, trembling, Lena raised her hand higher and formed a simple sign, a sign she had learned in school, but rarely used outside the deaf community. It was the universal ASL symbol for help. Her fingers shook as she held them up, silently begging for someone, anyone, to understand. For a moment, the world seemed to blur around her. The constant hum of footsteps and chatter became a chaotic fog. And still, no one looked. A single tear escaped her eye and rolled down her cheek. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of loneliness pressing down on her. In that moment, the airport felt enormous and empty, a place where she should have been just another traveler, but instead felt utterly lost and unheard. And then, across the room, a small figure noticed. Across the bustling airport, a small hand tugged at her mother's sleeve. 7-year-old Emily pointed toward Lena, her eyes wide with curiosity and concern. "Mommy, look, that girl, she's asking for help." Her mother glanced up, distracted by her phone, and shrugged. "I don't see anyone, sweetie. Let's just keep moving." But Emily couldn't look away. There was something in the way Lena's hands trembled, the way her lips moved silently, the quiet desperation in her eyes. Emily had learned a little American Sign Language from her cousin, who was deaf. A memory sparked inside her. Maybe she could talk to this girl, even without words. Emily stepped forward, small and hesitant, but determined. She approached Lena carefully, clutching her worn-out doll like a shield. Lena noticed the tiny figure moving toward her, unsure whether it was a friend or just another stranger passing by. Then Emily did something unexpected. She lifted her little hand and signed, "Hello." Lena's eyes widened, disbelief mixing with relief. Her lips curved into the faintest smile. "Someone understands me." Emily's mom finally looked up and saw Lena's struggle. Realizing the girl was alone, she quickly called over an airport staff member. The three of them approached Lena, and with Emily as their bridge, the girl was finally able to communicate, pointing to her flight details, showing the gate she needed. For the first time that morning, Lena felt a flicker of hope. She wasn't invisible. She wasn't alone. A small, brave heart had noticed her silent cry and decided to act. In the midst of thousands of travelers, it was a 7-year-old who saw her, and in that moment, the world felt a little kinder. With Emily by her side and her mother's guidance, Lena finally felt a sense of direction. An airport staff member knelt beside her, patiently pointing toward the updated gate information. Lena traced the letters and numbers with her fingers, relief washing over her in slow, steady waves. Emily, her small hand still brushing Lena's, smiled shyly. "You're going to be okay," she signed. Lena returned the gesture, her fingers trembling as the first real sense of safety touched her heart. Together, they walked through the bustling corridors of the airport, Lena's backpack bumping against Emily's side as they moved. The noise of announcements, rolling suitcases, and chatter faded into the background. For once, Lena didn't feel invisible. She felt seen. As they reached the gate, they had a few precious minutes to wait. Emily, sensing Lena's nervousness, pulled out her doll and signed, "Want to play?" Lena's eyes lit up, and she picked up a pen and napkin from the nearby counter. Together, they began drawing simple pictures, airplanes, smiling faces, even a tiny sun. The language of their hands spoke louder than any sound around them. Other travelers glanced over, curious at the silent exchange. Some smiled, some whispered to their companions. A stranger in a nearby seat caught the moment and nodded, touched by the pure innocence and connection between the two girls. In those few minutes, Lena's fear transformed into joy, and Emily's simple act of noticing turned into an unforgettable bond. It wasn't about spoken words anymore, it was about understanding, kindness, and human connection that transcended noise, chaos, and difference. Lena looked at Emily, eyes shining, and realized something profound. One small gesture of compassion could make the impossible feel possible. The moment finally came for Lena to board her flight. She clutched her backpack and approached the gate, her steps lighter than they had been all morning. Emily ran alongside her, holding out her little hand one last time. Lena stopped and turned to the 7-year-old who had changed her morning. She raised her hand and slowly formed the sign for, "Thank you." Her eyes shimmered with tears, tears of relief, gratitude, and a joy that only someone who truly understood her silence could bring. Emily's eyes widened, and she responded immediately, signing back, "Friend." A warm smile stretched across both their faces, bridging the gap of age, distance, and sound. Around them, travelers paused. Some noticed, some whispered quietly, all touched by the quiet exchange. In the middle of the noisy, bustling airport, a profound silence had emerged, a silence filled with connection, understanding, and pure humanity. As Lena stepped forward to board the plane, she turned for one last glance. Emily waved, and Lena waved back, a bond sealed not with words but with heart. The staff member who had helped them smiled softly, realizing that sometimes, the smallest gestures make the biggest difference. Emily returned to her mother's side, skipping happily, carrying with her a story she would never forget, the story of the girl who needed help, and the little girl brave enough to notice. Lena settled into her seat, looking out the airplane window as the city shrank below her. She realized that even in a world that often feels too loud, too fast, or too indifferent, there are always hearts willing to see, willing to care, willing to act. Sometimes, the loudest voices are silent. And sometimes, the smallest hands can change the world. Message. Even a simple act of noticing someone in need can create ripples of kindness that transform lives forever.